Caregiver fatigue. It's not just exhaustion, it's the slow, creeping burnout that takes over your life, emotionally, physically, even financially. And for women in midlife, it seems so impossible to avoid. You're already balancing a career. You're trying to hold together a marriage. Maybe you have adult kids who still need you. And then suddenly, you're the one responsible for an aging parent, or a sick spouse, or a family member who can't manage on their own. And here's the thing, everyone expects women to just handle it, to push through, to sacrifice. But what if doing it all isn't the answer? What if there's a better way? Today, we're breaking the silence on caregiver fatigue, why it's overwhelming so many women, how it impacts your relationships, career, health, and what to do to protect yourself before burnout takes over. And finally, don't forget to hit subscribe for more real insights. Caregivers don't just provide help, they make impossible decisions. They navigate healthcare systems, handle legal paperwork, manage finances, all while carrying the emotional weight of watching someone they love decline. It's relentless, and no one understands that better than today's guest, Pamela D. Wilson. Pamela is a nationally recognized caregiving expert, educator, and advocate. Through her YouTube channel, website, and online resources, she's helped thousands of caregivers navigate this overwhelming role. Today, she's here to talk about caregiver fatigue, what it is, why it's crushing so many women, and what we can do to fight back. Hi, Pamela. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Since the last time that we talked, I had so many people reach out to me and say, this is my life right now. They are in the thick of caregiving. And I know friends, family, women that I love that are just drowning in caregiving. Why are we not talking about caregiver fatigue and the impact that it has on women, especially women in midlife?
I think it's because if a person has brought this up before and they brought it up to a person who's not a caregiver, that person probably just shut the door on the conversation and said, well, you're supposed to take care of your parents. That's the way it goes. And so people sometimes become hesitant to talk about it because they don't know who it's like okay to talk about with and who it's like not okay to talk about with. So then we don't talk about it.
Which is really so sad because I think that's one of the things that can actually help a woman or a caregiver. So what are some of those signs of caregiver fatigue that we should be noticing in our friends and loved ones?
So even in friends and loved ones, it's, a sense of like exhaustion, like I'm overwhelmed. I have so much to do. I cannot possibly keep up. I know you're my friend, but I don't have any time to spend with you because I have to do like these 20 things for my mom or my dad. And maybe my siblings aren't helping, and for myself, it's just a sense of like, maybe I'm more impatient. Am I more cranky with people? Do I have less tolerance for people, like even people at work, right? Am I just short and I can't deal with things, right? You get exhausted and you get impatient and you get frustrated.
What happens when that person, the caregiver, ignores those signs?
Sometimes, it can start to damage their health. So I have a lot of caregivers who are so busy taking care of somebody else that they know they have to go to the doctor and they don't, or they don't feel well and they still go to work, or they don't feel well and they go to mom and dad's and then mom and dad get the cold that they had. So for one is health things, right? Mm-hmm. From just inattention. The other is, damaged relationships. And this is kind of an unintentional thing that happens because caregivers are impatient with other people and they feel like other people don't understand them. So sometimes the caregiver will just like close up, and stop talking to people because they feel that other people don't understand. So really they isolate themselves, which makes it then even harder to find anybody to talk to about being so fatigued and exhausted.
So they're basically removing themselves from all of these other relationships when they probably need them the most. When you're this exhausted and this fatigue is taking over, it causes a lot of stress and tension in those relationships.
Well, it can because sometimes people on the outside want to help, right? So maybe the caregiver just wants to vent and have somebody listen to like, "Oh, my life is horrible and all these things are happening." And the people on the other side are saying, "Well, but you could try this and you could try this and you could try that." And the caregiver, because they're so exhausted, they're not looking at this moment for solutions. They're looking for somebody who says, "Oh my gosh, I understand how you feel. That must feel exhausting. That must feel horrible. That must feel frustrating." They want somebody to listen and to empathize.
Yeah, well, I've been in that situation before where you do just want to vent with somebody and they offer some advice or tips on how to manage something. And it's the last thing that you need. It's almost irritating.
Well, when you're at that point, it is. And so sometimes, because I counsel caregivers and I'm like, "Well, would you like me to listen or would you like me to give you suggestions? Where are we today?" And so maybe if you're a friend of a caregiver in this situation and they call you, the first question you want to say is, "Well, am I listening today or am I helping you today? What would you like?"
When you ask somebody that, do you notice a change in the way they interact with you? Are they
Well,
more
yes,
relaxed because you're asking?
yes, yes. And it's always, if we can somehow kind of default to that asking permission, even in our general daily lives, with our husbands and wives and, kids and everything, you know, ask permission. Am I listening? Am I helping? Am I commenting? How can I help you today? And then, yeah, the person does like relax, right? And they're not so tense about feeling bad about venting. And sometimes, do you ever just call a friend and say, "Look, I just need you to listen to me for 10 minutes. Just listen to me for 10 minutes and don't say anything, and then I'll be fine." And then we can change the subject.
Yeah, oh, exactly. I've done that so many times. I even, and I have done that with my husband too. Like, don't just let me talk for even 30 seconds. It helps tremendously. It really does. You mentioned siblings. I have noticed that there's that one sibling who takes the burden of most of what's going on, and then the others are like, well, if she's doing it, I don't really have to worry about it.
So I see both sides of the sibling thing, and it's really fascinating. So I see the side that you're talking about where one caregiver takes all the responsibility and the other kids are like, "Phew, we don't have to do that. Goodbye. We're not showing up. We're not going to help." But then it's very interesting. I also see the side where there is that one sibling that takes over and they exclude the other siblings. So they're like, "Well, mom or dad asked me to take care of mom or dad, and it's my responsibility, and I don't want y'all helping. I'm going to do all this." And when the siblings say, "Well, hey, can I help with this?" They're like, "No, I got it covered." And they maybe don't want to give information to their siblings about a parent's health, especially if they're the power of attorney. So maybe they hide information. Maybe they'll tell siblings, "Well, it's not a good time for you to visit." So they isolate. I see, because I talk to so many people,
Mm-hmm.
both sides of this, and it's a very, very complex situation because a lot of these sibling relationships go back to childhood and how siblings got along in childhood and how parents treated each child. So that carries on to these caregiving years and these caregiving relationships.
Thank you for bringing that up because that is a very interesting take on it. I think I was thinking more that that caregiver was going to feel the burden of what they're doing, but the isolating the other siblings is very interesting. That's a really challenging situation.
It's very hard. I mean, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they end up on my doorstep, and I do weekly counseling with siblings who have committed to try to get along, right? They may not like each other. They may have all this stuff from childhood. And so when you change the focus from "I don't like my sister" or "I don't like my brother" to "I love my mother" or "I love my father," and you focus on the parent instead of your relationships, you can get a lot further. Now, I don't want to discount, though, your point about sometimes there is one sibling who does everything and the other siblings just disappear. That is a horrible situation. Many times, what I've seen happen is that sibling eventually burns out and they tell the other siblings, "Look, I just can't do this anymore." and I'm leaving. Or they just one day pack up and disappear. And the other siblings are like, well, how did this happen? It's like, well, you didn't want to be involved. That's how it happened.
And, that might be your only option is to leave because you just can't do it anymore.
And sometimes it is. And then on the other side, sometimes where there's multiple siblings and they want to help and they want to be involved and one sibling is not allowing, sometimes those end up in court situations, which I work in a lot too, where, the families have to go to court mediation or try to figure out how to work together because they just won't do it because of their interpersonal issues and grudges. I mean, when you end up in court or you end up in litigation, and sometimes it's necessary, I'm not saying it's not, right? But sometimes it can just make family situations so much worse because then you've got, people over here on this side and people over here on that side, and nobody ever really comes together, ever.
Okay, how about when you're the caregiver and it happens to be your in-law that you're caregiving for? That has to add a whole nother layer of stress and fatigue to a situation.
It's complicated because it depends on, sometimes, first of all, it's your spouse's relationship with their parents. So you have that. Like, did they get along? Did they not get along? So then maybe if they didn't get along, you as the other spouse are like, well, my stepmother, my stepfather didn't treat my husband well. So how can I, do this? So there's that. And then if you've got in-laws or even step-parents, there's blended families, right? So you have all these other siblings, that are trying to get along. It's complicated, and it's, the best way to do it if there are issues is to learn to set some boundaries around, with your spouse. This is our time. This is time to take care of your mom or dad. This is time with our children. You've got to really not let that caregiving overtake all the other relationships in your life.
Have you seen situations where the person that you're taking care of is in your home? That adds a lot of stress and changes a lot of relationships, and I'm sure it adds to the exhaustion and the fatigue.
It
How
adds
do
to,
you set those boundaries when that person is with you, 24/7?
well, I caution people, first of all, on if you're thinking about moving your parent or one of your parents in with you, you want to really think about it and think about how it's going to affect everybody and talk about this. So it's almost like you do a premarital agreement. You do a pre-move-in agreement with your parents to say, look, this is how it's going to work. If we ever get to this point where it's not working, then we have to look at you moving out. So under what circumstances does that happen? And if you have kids, the impact of a sick parent or a parent with dementia who has behaviors on your kids can be significant. And most parents don't realize that. I mean, children can be traumatized by a parent who has dementia and maybe hallucinates or has behaviors and who's angry and all of that kind of stuff, because the kids don't understand that like it's an illness, right? They think that grandma and grandpa is like mean or crazy, and that can stay with them for a lifetime, believe it or not. So you have to be very careful about these things.
Well, it's hard for a grown-up to understand that situation and to watch your parent go through that. But yes, I could imagine a grandchild watching that would be extremely difficult. A lot of times, what I'm hearing is that it's hard for the caregiver to say no to their parents, even though it might not be the ideal situation. It's whatever the parent wants to do. How do you handle that type of situation when they want to move in with you or they don't want to leave their home and you know that you have to have these difficult conversations, but it's probably the best thing for them?
So it depends on your role. So are you just the child, or are you a legally responsible person like your parents' power of attorney? Now, I do want to say that just because you're a power of attorney doesn't mean you take control over your parent's life. You can only do that if that power of attorney allows you to do so, if your parent has dementia or Alzheimer's and it's progressed. Now, let me just make that statement. Sometimes you have to set boundaries with your parents and say, look, I know I've been doing a lot for you. I'm your caregiver 40 hours a week. I can't do anymore. So if and when you need more help, we have to look at assisted living or bringing caregivers in. And if you refuse, I understand that you're refusing, but I can't do any more. So you kind of have to start to offer other options, say what you can and what you can't do, And then this is a really hard one. You have to let the chips fall where they may. So like if your parents refuse and you said, look, I think you need a caregiver because you're a fall risk, or probably need physical therapy because you're a fall risk. If you fall, you may end up breaking a hip. You may end up in a nursing home. You're making that choice by not making these other choices, right? And then you let it happen. And then unfortunately, you deal with it when it happens, meaning, your parent goes to a nursing home. Maybe they can't move back home, so their home has to be sold. They have to move into a care community. You have to talk about future consequences of decisions made or not made today.
Yeah, I've just recently seen so many friends struggle with that exact situation. They have to tell their parents something that they don't want to hear, and they have a hard time saying no. And watching that is really difficult because that's not something that, you want to comment on, but you do feel sorry for the person who is the caregiver.
Well, it's kind of a reverse situation, right? When we were children and our parents were older, and our parents would say, oh, you shouldn't do that, or, don't hang around with bad friends or whatever, right? And we did it anyway. Our parents watched us do the things that they told us not to do, and we did them anyway, and stuff happened. It's kind of a reverse situation. I mean, everybody has the right to make bad choices, right?
Yes, I think it's just that struggle where you sometimes feel that you're maybe disappointing that parent, or they're dealing with the fear of leaving a home that they've lived in for the last 30 years, or leaving their friends behind, or having to move into maybe a new state even to get closer to the child who's caregiving. Like those are just such heavy things. And I feel sorry for both sides because I feel sorry for the parent who has to leave and for the child who has to deliver that type of information.
Well, and thank you for bringing that up because I want to let's talk about the other side for a second. So, yes, the person who has the health issues or the parent who has the health issues. A lot of times, caregivers, we think about ourselves and our stress and everything.
Mhm.
But if we've been healthy all of our lives and we've not had an illness, and we don't understand like the effect of Alzheimer's or arthritis or cancer on our parents, it's very difficult to put ourselves in their shoes. So, and I'll use cancer as an example. I mean, a cancer diagnosis is life changing, and people who have to go through chemotherapy and radiation and all of that, you've got kids over here saying, oh my gosh, my parents need all this help. But then you really have your parent on this other side who's thinking, oh my gosh, am I going to die in 6 months? Am I going to survive these treatments? They make me feel horrible every day. I go to chemotherapy, and like half the time the people I used to see, they're not showing up anymore. I mean, it's kind of like facing your own mortality and death, over here with kids who are like going on with their life. And so it's a very lopsided situation. And the best way to work through it is to say, Mom and Dad, I can't even imagine what you're feeling. Are you scared about this? What's going on in your mind? Because when you're in that situation, you can't make decisions. You're trying to like survive the next day and get out of bed the next day. Your last concern is like, my kids want me to do X, Y, Z. So you have to really understand what's going on from both sides. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I almost hate to have this conversation, but I've seen so many of my friends and family going through this situation right now, and caregiver fatigue, it is real. But there's also the other person who they are taking care of that is really struggling with so many different emotions. And I think we have to offer a little grace to both sides.
Yes, definitely.
If you're the only caregiver, and I'm bringing this up because I saw an episode of a television show recently, and this woman was the caregiver and brought her mother into the emergency room, and she was so tired she left her there so that she could go sleep in her car for a couple of hours. Like that type of caregiver fatigue is exceptional. You're the only one. You don't have anybody else to look to, and you might not know how to find different resources. What can we do for that person?
For single caregivers, maybe you're the only child, or again, maybe your siblings are 10,000 miles away and you're there. You've got to find help, and you've got to admit that you can't do it yourself. I mean, it's kind of like the whole Alcohol Anonymous thing, right? It's like, I can't do this by myself. If you can admit that you can't do it by yourself, now sometimes caregivers are too tired, but you've got to find resources. Is there money where you can hire a caregiver for your parents? If there isn't money, what is that state Medicaid program and how do you get signed up for it? There are local area agencies on aging in every county. They have huge resource lists. And sometimes there's grant money to pay for what's called respite care. So, like to give somebody a break so they can go sleep for 8 hours, right? Or to give somebody a break so they can have a day off. So, really, before you get to that point of being like so fatigued and so exhausted, if you can start taking time to investigate everything that's out there so that you kind of have a plan for what happens when things get worse, what happens when your parents need more care. So you don't become that fatigued, exhausted caregiver and you have ways to work through. Because I've heard caregivers who do like, they just want to go lay down on the couch and take a nap and they don't have time.
Yes.
Or they sleep in their car because they're trying to get away from a parent in the house. I mean, I've heard those stories and it's tragic.
This person isn't asking for a lot. They're asking for a 2-hour nap in the middle of the day just so that they could kind of, catch up with themselves. And it is hard to ask for help. Have you seen, though, that the people that are caught off guard, sometimes we see it coming. We know that the parent is suffering from illness of some kind, or they have dementia, but then there are also those times where it's sudden. Maybe it's a stroke or a heart attack or something happens that completely catches the caregiver by
Off guard.
surprise.
Yeah, I mean, in those situations, you're probably scrambling. Maybe somebody had a heart attack or broke a hip or was in a car accident. I mean, then you kind of just have to show up. But that event should be the event that has you sit down with your parents and say, okay, something now happened. What are we going to do next time something happens? Or if you don't recover from this as much as you think, what do you want for your care? How are we going to pay for care? Where do you want to live? Let's get a plan together. So those unexpected incidents really can be blessings in disguise to say, okay, we need to talk now. This is, maybe we've tried to talk before and nobody wanted to talk, but now we have to talk and have these conversations.
Yeah, we try to kick that can down the road until we,
Of
are
course.
actually in the emergency room and realize we probably should have talked about this sooner. So, what if I can't take a shift? Like you have a really good friend or a sister-in-law or someone that you're really close with, and like you said, they're in another state. I can't go there and help them out, but I know that they need some type of, like you said, respite. What can you do for that person when you see them drowning?
So a really nice thing you could do is kind of talk to them and say, hey, what type of help would be good for you? And truly, if they're drowning and they don't have time to investigate services and options, what if you do the groundwork for them? You'd be surprised the information you can get from searching the internet, making phone calls, doing research. I mean, you could help somebody who's drowning come up with a care plan for their parents. You know, and a lot of times we don't think about that because we may have never done it, right? But like making 10 phone calls for somebody or you want to do something nice, well, buy a caregiver for the weekend for them and let them go to the spa or sleep or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things that friends and family members can do for caregivers that they don't think about. The spa things are nice, right? But really the most valuable things are, look, how can I help you deal with the day to day? Now, a lot of times caregivers are going to say, oh no, it's too complicated. You're not going to be able to help me. Well, trust me, you can, right? If they let you, because this is what happens between siblings. And it's like, well, can I investigate, assisted living communities? Can I make some phone calls? Can I make some calls with caregiving agencies? I mean, what can I do to help you that's really time consuming that you're worried about? Or can I just call and talk to your mom and dad like for 30 minutes every couple of days so that somebody else is talking to them and it gives you a break? I mean, figure out really what can help them and offer to do it.
I didn't think about making the phone calls, but yes, and you'll know because I'm sure in talking to your friend or family, they're saying what they're struggling with. Maybe it's even an additional hand in the house, someone to come in and do some light housekeeping, anything like that. But when they make those comments, that's a great idea, is to help them find those resources.
Yes. Because that's most of the time they're like, I'm just too tired to make a phone call. I don't have time for that. Well, be their time. Be their time. Offer them time.
Yeah, do that. Make those phone calls. There's also a huge financial side to this. I have seen a lot of women who have become caregivers cut back on their hours, or they quit their jobs, or they're going through their savings. How do you protect your financial future? You can't lose your life savings in order to take care of somebody else.
And many family members do, I'll be honest. They sacrifice everything. And I never, ever recommend that. So, what I recommend, and sometimes parents don't want to talk about money, right? Is when you have like the what do you want for your care, have a conversation about money. And if your parents refuse, then you can send them to somebody like me and I'll have a conversation with your parents about money. But you have to know, have they saved for retirement? How much? Do they own their house? Is there still a mortgage on it? Do they have long-term care insurance? I mean, what money is available to pay for care? But then you in the conversations need to know like what care costs. Caregivers these days are, I mean, depending on where you live, 20, 30, 40, $50 an hour. Assisted living, $3,000, $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 a month. The nursing home, $300 to $500 a day. I mean, it's expensive. Most people do not have this money. So that's where you have the conversation to say, look, okay, you have this amount of money. If you need this kind of care, it's going to get us by maybe a year or two. You need a 5-year financial plan. So if you have to plan for Medicaid, you can do that. And Medicaid is a state program for low-income people who don't have money to pay for care, who need physical help, like help with bathing and dressing and, mobility and things like that, or they have memory loss. So you really need a 5-year look ahead for your parents to say, okay, what are your health issues? How much money is it costing? What do we need to plan for so that you can start that planning? Those conversations are the only way that you can do it. And if your parents are hesitant to share money, say, look, mom or dad, we need to talk about this because I'm not using my retirement money to pay for your care. There are state programs, but we can't plan for them at the last minute. We have to plan 5 years ahead.
You can't sacrifice your financial future.
No, it's too hard to gain back, especially, I mean, I have so many caregivers who will like go part-time or give up their job. And then they do that because they think, well, it's only going to be for like 6 months. And then like 5 years later, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't have the skills to get a job again. I'm never going to be able to enter the workforce at the level that I left. I mean, look at how technology has changed the workplace, It's at light speed. So I never, ever, ever recommend giving up your job to take care of a parent. Ever.
I think that's where the guilt comes in, though. I've seen that in friends that they, you have to trust your parents' care to somebody else. So that's hard. That's really hard.
It is hard, but if you set up a good situation, like good in-home caregivers or a good assisted living community, it's not that you still can't be involved. You're just not the one, doing the dishes and picking up the prescription and making the meals. You're more you have that child relationship, right? Rather than the person who does all the tasks and cleans the toilet and runs all the errands, which is why caregivers get so fatigued. Help relieves caregiver fatigue. Then you can have a relationship and not be the worker bee.
Because isn't it nice when someone brings you a hot meal or will come and clean your kitchen for you? Wow, that can make such a difference in somebody's day.
That's something nice for you. I mean, lets you line in front of them. I mean, oh my gosh,
I would love for somebody to come do that for me now, but I don't know if people really talk about when you start to sort of resent that person that you're caring for. How do we avoid that?
So, I mean, I've had caregivers say, I thought I was going to do this for a year or 2 years and it's 5 years. And now I don't like my parents anymore. And I've given up my life and I'm never going to get back the time I've lost. The way to avoid all of these things, the fatigue, the resentment, the exhaustion, is to have conversations early on and set expectations and set boundaries, which most of us don't do, again, because something happens and we want to be helpful and we want to jump in and we want to solve the problem. But what we don't realize is we're making the people that we're helping, our parents or somebody else, more dependent on us. And the minute that you make a person dependent on you by doing things, they continue to be dependent and more dependent. And then they expect more things. And you're getting resentful because your parents are expecting all these things, but yet who did it? The caregiver did it. The caregiver set those expectations by doing too much. So early conversations can avoid so much of what happens in caregiving. It really can.
Maybe not taking away too much too soon from the parent, like allowing them to still be responsible for small things so that they feel they have some skin in this game.
Well, and that's where, so caregivers usually are very efficient. Okay. So what they think is, well, I can do this for mom and dad, and it's going to take me 10 minutes. It's going to take them an hour, because there's this patience thing, right? Like, for example, your parent uses a walker, right? They would love to get out of the house and go to the grocery store. But by the time you get them in your car and you get them to the grocery store and they're walking down the aisles and they're looking at everything and you're looking at your watch and you're thinking, man, I got to be out of here, right? The best thing for your parent is to do what they're doing, getting into the car, getting out of the car, walking through the grocery store, looking around. That's really good for your parents, okay? But it's not good for you as a caregiver from a time frame. So what do? You tell your parents, oh, stay home. I'll go get the groceries for you. Where instead, you could hire a caregiver to take your parents to the grocery store. And if they spend 5 hours at the grocery store, who cares? It's good for your parents to get out and walk and socialize and do things. So by you being the efficient person, you're taking away things that your parents can still do. You just don't like that they're so slow. And that's really, the more you let your parents do for yourself that they can still do, the better it is for everybody.
Having someone else take them to the grocery store, though, that's a good move.
Or to the doctor appointment. I mean, you can show up on the telephone at the doctor appointment. You don't have to like physically take them there, because doctor appointment can turn into a 5-hour thing. By the time you get them into the car, you go to the doctor, then you got to go get prescriptions. Then they want to go to the grocery store. Again, hiring somebody else to do that and you just showing up at the doctor appointment by phone or by a virtual thing to get the questions answered, way less time than 5 hours.
True. I have heard people, and I don't mean to laugh, but I'm only doing it because you described the exact situations in which I've heard my friends say, it took me
For
hours.
Yes.
Just to go to, pick up their prescriptions, but they wanted to go with, of course they did, because they're stuck in the house all the time.
Exactly. And it's good for them to get out and walk.
Yes.
So you have to think about, you don't want your parents sitting around all day. They're going to get physically weak. They're going to be more likely to fall. You want your parents to do as much as possible for themselves, even if you have to pay somebody else to do it with them.
Yes, but having them do it while they can still do it is a big deal.
Very important.
You've mentioned a couple of times already about how having these conversations is so important, but they are so hard to have. And I've witnessed conversations. I've had to be a part of these types of conversations. What kind of advice do you give when you see that you need to have this conversation? How do we start it?
I usually would recommend starting it so first you want to prepare before the conversation, okay? Mm-hmm. So rather than having a conversation of telling, have a conversation of asking. So, hey, mom and dad, I'm noticing that this is happening. Like maybe you're forgetting to take your meds, right? What's going on there? What's making that difficult? How can I help? So you don't want to point out like all the bad things that they're doing, because then they're going to get, they're going to clam up, right? They're not going to want to talk. Because who wants to be like approached by anybody who says, well, hey, you're not doing these 10 things and you're doing a bad job? Well, it's like those conversations never go well. So it's like, hey, I'm noticing this. Help me understand what's going on. How can I help you? Or how can we get you help? And, sometimes I may say, well, I don't need, help, but then say, well, then how do we solve this? What's the answer to this? Try not to use the word problem or whatever, but be more questioning and just see if they're more receptive. So you want to make them like want to have these conversations with you and trust you to have these conversations, and actually call you and say, hey, you know what, this is happening. I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do? And make it be more about, I want to make sure that I know what you want for help, or if something happens, what you want to do, all of that. Not, not I'm going to come in and take over and do all this for you, right? You leave as much responsibility on them, you know, to ask for help and to notice for help. And, it's kind of like sometimes you're going to have to like take a step back and like maybe bring it up again in 3 weeks if they don't jump in and offer like, well, I need this or I need that. Or, you can just say, hey, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Have you thought any more about that?
Right, right. So what did you say? Ask, don't tell.
Ask, don't try. Yeah, try not to tell. It's very hard, very, very hard. If you can limit yourself to only asking questions so that you understand, you will get a lot further. But I'll tell you, it's very hard to do.
As soon as that parent feels like they're being judged, like, Mom, the dishes are sitting in the sink, or did you do your laundry is piling up? I think that hurts a little bit because you don't feel that you're at the top of your game.
Right. Or they feel like they're being judged, or that, kids think they can't handle things. I mean, maybe they can't, but, it's just kind of that thing.
Right. You just have to start to be aware of that.
Yes.
Okay. When you're this caregiver and you're experiencing this fatigue that we're talking about, what is just one thing that they can do to sort of reclaim some space and time in their lives?
So what I talk to caregivers about is what's one thing that you can do for yourself every day. So there's lots of diaries that I talk about. I talk about like worry diaries and stress diaries, but maybe start a diary of like, this is what I'm doing for myself today. I'm going to take a 10-minute walk. I'm going to make myself a cup of coffee and go sit on the porch for 5 minutes. I mean, what can you start doing for yourself every day to rebalance this situation where you're so exhausted because you think you have all these things to do? And really, it's wrapping your mind around it, because if you don't think you could do it, you're not going to be able to do it. So you have to first believe that it's possible to take back your self-esteem and your pride in yourself and take back some time. So if you don't believe you can do it, not going to happen. You have to believe you can do it. And the way to get there is to do it in like a 5-minute increment. Like, okay, today, this 5 minutes is all mine and nobody else gets it. And then maybe next week it's 10 minutes and then 20 minutes and then 30 minutes. And then you're like, wow, this 30 minutes is really nice. Maybe I'm going to do an hour. But you have to start somewhere with doing something for yourself that you like, that you enjoy, and not letting anybody else take that away from you.
I just want to go back really quickly. What is a stress or worry journal?
So what I tell caregivers is, so sometimes any of us, all of us can like, we swirl in this anxiety, right? Our mind's going like, I'm worried about that. I can't think about that, whatever. So the way that you can stop that is you have a notebook or a piece of paper. And every time this thing shows up over here, you write it down and you're like, okay, I'm going to think about this. And you set a time. I think about all my worries and my anxieties from 6 to 6:15 every night. And so during the day when they come up, I don't think about them then. I write them down here. And then that's when I think about them. So you train your mind not to like spin in this anxiety all day, because how many of us do that, right? We're worried about 10 million things, right? You stop it and you say, no, I'm going to write it down. And at this time, that's when I think about it. I do not think about it now. And it's really a retraining of your brain, right? To say, no, you don't get to control me up there. I'm putting you over here, and I control the time that I worry and I'm anxious and all of that. And then I deal with it. And then I figure out how to deal with it.
I would imagine, though, that sometimes you look back on what you were worrying about in that moment, and it's probably not a worry anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. Because how many times do we, it's kind of like that, I call it self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You worry about something and then it happens. Or you worry about something and it never happens. Well, how much headspace is that taking up in your brain every day that's causing you to be more fatigued and more anxious? Probably a lot, especially for caregivers.
When we're looking for resources and how to figure these types of things out and how to, handle, like you said, making a 5-year plan, can you just talk a little bit about your YouTube channel and the amount of information that we could find there? Because I think if a person was struggling with not just their caregiver fatigue, but any other types of issues, what are some of the topics that you cover?
So I have to thank everybody that watches my YouTube videos and follows me because they give me the ideas for these videos. So my YouTube channel is based on I answer questions caregivers ask. If you watch one of my videos and it doesn't cover a subject that you want, put a comment in there. I respond to every single comment. I see every single comment, and that's how I choose the next videos. So right now, I think there's over 900 videos. In those videos are 3 online courses that I have. So one is how to take care of aging parents. There's 8 modules. So there's webinars associated with that. One's about power of attorney, one's about guardianship. So much information. And again, it's, what are caregivers struggling with today? That's what I'm doing a video about. So it's really, to some degree I control the content because I respond to it, but the ideas come to me from everybody who watches and everybody who shares those videos. And then, it ends up usually in a article or a podcast on my website too.
Has there ever been a comment that really surprised you that was something that someone was dealing with?
What's coming up, I mean, I can talk about more of like what's coming up lately. Lately, it's a lot of feeling unappreciated and siblings who just are not getting along. So, sometimes it's about spousal caregiving. I mean, it just kind of depends. And sometimes, because I do a video then and people comment on it, brings up a lot more things on that same subject. So it really just depends on, what's going on that day and time. A lot of, caregivers of dementia, that's a very popular subject. Like, how do I deal with all of this care? And a lot of caregivers who are fatigued and burned out and just who don't know that. And I talk about this, it's like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. You have the ruby red slippers. All you need to do is put them on and believe that you can, and you can change your situation. You just have to believe in yourself.
That is hard to do sometimes. So where is the best place to find you? The name of your YouTube channel and your website?
So the website is just my name. So it's Pamela D like dog, PamelaDWilson.com. My YouTube channel, if you just Google Pamela D. Wilson YouTube, you'll find it. It's the Caregiving Expert. And then from my website, there are links to my YouTube channel and my podcast and a lot of other free resources.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and to please keep doing what you're doing because you don't know how much of a difference that you're making for so many viewers and just people in general, because this is something that so many of us are going to face at one point in our lives, and we need to be prepared when that moment happens.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Real Insights. If you want to hear more about how other women balance caregiving and avoid burnout, order your copy of Empart, Real Stories, Real Wisdom, Real Menopause on Amazon today. And don't forget to join the conversation at joinimpart.com. Until next time, remember, menopause is a journey, but you're not alone.